So, hi everybody, welcome back to Life in Law. Today we have our special guest with us, Christine, and she is here to help talk about some of the things that have been going on in her case and some of the other things that have been happening. Thank you so much for coming.
I appreciate it. So I've been advocating for about 10 years in domestic violence and sexual assault, and have kind of a little bit different background. I wanted to be an attorney at one point and then decided that maybe that wasn't the right path to take. When you're a victim and you look to speak out about what personally happens to you, it really kind of pulls you back into a different perspective.
Absolutely. So, why don't you start by just sharing a little bit background about yourself and a little bit about your case, what you're comfortable sharing?
Okay, so I am a Gold Star Army wife. I am a mom of five, who is a domestic violence victim. And in specifics with my case, I can't really talk much about it because my kids are still in a dangerous situation. And it's been really hard for me because I haven't had the ability to have contact with them because of what's been going on. But my background is, like I said, advocating. So, unfortunately, in this journey, we as advocates find that other people in this country face the same issues. And so I think it's really sad that I'm not the only one currently going through this situation. And I've met several other moms and dads in this situation. And so I think it's kind of different perspectives coming together to assist in maybe changing of the policies so that these kids can be reunited with their families.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, you said you're a Gold Star military, and what can you explain what that means for listeners?
Yeah, so my late husband passed away 1/1/2008. He passed away on terminal leave. So the Army, being a widow of a service member, basically allows us to remain in the military's family as one of their own after you lose somebody that served this country.
And so, has the military been providing resources to help you with the domestic violence and navigating through the system?
The military has been extremely helpful, but just like the military, like the civilian system, there are a lot of policies that I've noticed just personally walking this journey, and I know others have, where lines have been blurred. So it's very different speaking UCMJ law versus speaking normal civilian law. It's one of those things that I think yes, they have been helping, but I think the policies need to be changed so that there's a little bit more accountability and enforcement of these bills and acts that are currently in place. There isn't a transition from the active duty bills to the veterans arena. There's a lot of people in this situation where PTSD is being deemed domestic violence, whereas domestic violence may be actually PTSD. So I think as a whole, the military is doing a very good job. I think the civilian side is doing the best that they can. But until both sides actually talk, not just on my behalf or anybody else's, I don't think the policies are going to be where they need to be, you know? And so a lot of us have had to walk this journey, kind of pointing out things that, don't make it make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, is this mic working? Sorry. There we go. I think that the board, you'll see these policies and laws and statutes get put into place or that are already existing. And the problem is that they're not being enforced. There's no oversight. It's like, what good does it do if you have a law? Like, I was saying this to my daughter the other day, if you have rights and nobody's enforcing your rights and nobody's protecting your rights, it's the same as having no rights. And we were talking about how, it's all in the news, like in Afghanistan, that they're saying women can't appear on balconies or speak in public or even have windows in their house. And I'm like, these are laws that they can't do these things. But in America, we have so-called rights, but we really don't, because when it comes down to it, if someone violates your rights, they have immunity. If you try to sue them, if you try to, get criminal charges against somebody who is part of the government, good luck, And so it's like there's people who try to be whistleblowers and they're supposed to be whistleblower protections, but yeah, in real life, they don't play out how they play out in paper. So I think that this is what people need to realize. Like, it's so much more than just getting these policies and laws changed. It's actually putting in checks and balances to make sure that they can be enforced in a way that's actually efficient and feasible.
I agree with that. I also would probably expand on that a little bit more in the aspect that you have our constitutional given rights. Like, we have a right to our children, we have a right to due process, we have a right to free speech. And here in this country, we also have statutes and laws put into place. And then you have your state laws, and then you have your county ordinances. And you can add to a law, but you can't take away from a law. And I think in a lot of these situations nationwide, we are seeing counties and states kind of usurp the federal laws of protection. And so, for example, as a victim of domestic violence, if you go over another state line and you are intimidated or harassed or bullied to leave the state, that's a violation of the federal domestic violence laws. Well, where do you go? Because here's the thing, if you go to your local law enforcement and you give them your protection order and you give them everything that you have, they are therein required to notify the federal agencies. So the DOJ, the FBI, like, where is the oversight? And so with everything that's currently going on in this country, I'm kind of excited to see, maybe an oversight committee being established. You have Doge, they're going through all the funds right now. They're literally finding 300-year-old women or men or dogs that are getting paid Social Security. And we're sitting here talking about, the American families and the domestic violence and our military and our community. And it just makes me wonder at this point if the administration is not only going to be investigating DCYF, but are they going to be investigating why local and state law enforcement isn't following the correct chain of command? And so I think it's going to be interesting, because if they actually put in an oversight committee, it makes me really excited to see all of these families be returned home. Because some people have been separated for over 30 plus years, and they don't even realize that they were a victim of the system. So I think education is really important in all of this, even in our own personal journeys, because I think the more you know, the more you're able to advocate for yourself. And then if you find somebody along the journey that's just as bad off or worse than you can kind of say, well, this is where I messed up and I shouldn't have done this. And you might want to try this, because if you do this, X, Y, and Z is going to happen, because I paid for the price for whether it's speaking up, or as some people would say, whistleblowing. But for some of us, it's lessons learned. And I find myself personally, and I know you can agree to this, advocating for state and federal policies to not only be changed, but to be enforced at a different level, to be able to freely speak, because it doesn't just happen to women, it happens to men, and it happens to our veterans, and it happens to service members. And it's not a discriminatory situation. It's a matter of localities of local courts and communication. And I think personally, this is a massive lack of communication in the system. It's broken. Like, how do you think this would be correctable, and what aspect of an oversight committee can you see being put in place that would actually maybe correct some of these issues personally?
Well, one of the biggest problems is when they enact federal laws and federal legislation and leave it up to the states to make their own policies and make their own procedures of how they implement it. There's no oversight. And I think that there needs to be like a federal jurisdiction when it comes to this type of stuff. Like, for example, with the protective orders, the protective order that I had says on it that it's enforceable in all 50 states and US territories. And it cites the USC whatever law that makes it allowed. So in theory, you should be able to go to any police department in any state in any U.S. territory and report that somebody made a violation, and they have the authority to enforce it. Well, in my situation, I went to numerous police departments in Connecticut. I tried going to Connecticut State Police, University of Connecticut School of Law Police, Hartford Police, New Britain Police, Orange Police, who else? Wallingford Police, Waterbury Police, New Haven Police, just to name a few. And every single one of them refused to make an arrest for violation of protective order. And my ex was arrested in January of 2023. He was charged with harassment in the second degree. He has an extensive DV record. He has convictions on his record for reckless endangerment and previous assault charges and violations of conditions of release. He's done prison time and probation time. So he's not new to being a DV offender. And so he was arrested for harassment. They issued a full no contact protective order in the state of Connecticut. Derby Court issued it January 30th, 2023. It said full no contact. It said that he's only allowed to contact me inside the Family Wizard app. And it says he can only contact me via Family Wizard regarding the visitation and affairs of our child, and said that everything else was full no contact. And because at the time we had a visitation or custody agreement that said that when our daughter was with the other parent, that the opposite parent would get a 7 p.m. phone call each night to say goodnight between 7 and 7:15 p.m. So when the judge was like telling him like, oh yeah, this is full no contact, you can only talk to her in the app, blah, 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 he started saying, oh, well, how am I supposed to call my daughter at 7:00 for the phone call? And started demanding that they put in provisions allowing him to call to talk to her. So they did. The judge put in, and his exact words were that he's allowed to facilitate / initiate contact with the protected party for the purpose of contact with their minor child in accordance with the most recent civil family order. So that right there is so confusing and so wordy that your average law enforcement scratches their head and doesn't understand and is like, we don't even know what this means. And so like, if you want to break it down, basically it's trying to say that, okay, the order says you can call her at 7:00. So if he calls my phone at 7:00, it's not a violation. If he calls my phone at 8:00, it's a violation. So theoretically, it was allowing him to call my phone and me hand my daughter the phone so she can talk to him. And when she was with him, it allowed him to accept my call, facilitate, and let me talk to her for my 7:00 call. But what ended up happening was every time I would do these 7:00 calls, he would talk to me on the phone. And the reason he was arrested and charged with harassment in the first place was because the police told him not to contact me outside the app. He was court ordered to only talk to me in the app. And he kept texting me, calling me, emailing me, everything outside the app. And so I went to the police and I was like, I only want contact in the app like the order says. And they told him, if you keep contacting her outside the app, we're going to charge you with harassment. He continued to do it. They finally arrested him with harassment. And that's when they put the protective order. So he was already previously warned, like, you'll be arrested for harassment if you have any contact with her again outside the app. And then he was arrested. And then the full no contact order went into effect, stating that do not harass, assault, this, that, or contact outside the app, or it's a felony. In Connecticut, it's a felony and it's a 5-year prison sentence. So if you can get up to 5 years in prison and it's a felony to violate that order to contact me outside the app, and I went to the police 100 times showing them video and audio recordings of him talking to me on the phone when I'm trying to talk to my daughter, and how can you say that it's a question of if it's a violation? If he talks to me outside the app, it's a violation, period. But the police would be like, well, we're not sure if it's a violation. We're going to call the court and see what they say. And then the next day they'd be like, oh, we called the court and they said that not to arrest him and it's not a violation. So every time when he would violate the order and not get arrested, he would get more and more empowered. And I would keep trying to file as a victim in the case motions to modify the protective order, asking that they make it more specific because law enforcement can't understand it and it's too ambiguous and they're not enforcing it. And they refused. And finally, they ended up arresting me in May of 2023 after one of the times when I called to report that he violated the order. And they charged me with false statement to police and disorderly conduct and didn't arrest him. And then in the paperwork, they labeled him as the victim, even though on the protective order, it also says under the law that the protected party can never be charged for aiding, or even if I said, like, if I called him and begged him to come over and said, please come over, and begged him, and he did, he would be arrested for violating the order, but I couldn't get in trouble. But that's what the law says, right? The protected party can never be arrested for telling them to or helping them or even indirectly making them violate it. But they didn't even arrest him at all, and they only arrested me. And then they put a full no contact one protecting him from me that had the exact same language that said you can only talk in the app. And then he continued to violate it over and over and over and over. And then when it came time to, you know, you have your rights as a victim where you have the right to hear from the prosecution of what the deal is going to be. You have the right to say a statement, all this stuff. Yeah, they did not give me any of those rights. And the so-called lawyer that was representing me in my criminal case showed up at my ex's court date with the prosecutor, didn't tell me, showed up behind my back there and said that he was there to represent me as the victim, even though he was not representing me as the victim in that case. And so then they just said, oh, well, she, because literally like right, maybe 2 months before that, I lost custody of my daughter for reporting sexual abuse and being accused of lying in court. So then he went back to the criminal court and said, see, look what the custody judge wrote about her. She lied. She's not credible. So then the prosecutor was like, oh, well, she's not credible. So therefore, we're going to just dismiss this whole case, and dismissed the whole case and threw it out. But my case for false statement to police and disorderly conduct and the violation of protective order they charged me with after that is still open, even though in Connecticut you have 1 year to take the case to trial, or it must be dismissed by law under the speedy trial laws. They are refusing to give me a trial. They're refusing to dismiss my case, and they keep trying to charge me with more and more violations of protective order for posting on social media, even though me posting on social media, I have freedom of speech. I have freedom of the press. I'm a journalist, and I also have the freedom to speak up about things, and nobody makes anybody go on my page and look. You choose to go on my page and look. If you want to take time out of your day and go on my page, that's your problem. I'm not forcing anybody to look. So how is that harassment? How is that violating an order? It's not. It's just a way to try to get my IP addresses and everything else that they tried to ask for from Instagram. And so like, my point is that like, as a woman who literally went to the police over 100 times in the course of a year, showing evidence with typed statements where I'm citing the law that he's breaking, saying exactly what he did and showing evidence on a flash drive and printing it out and going there and having them laugh at me and refuse to arrest him. And then I went to my daughter's pediatrician in October of that year, and I was arrested and charged with violation of protective order for going to her pediatrician's office to get records, which it's not a violation. But when he violated the no contact hundreds of times, they said that that's not a violation. So you see, it's like when somebody actually breaks the law, they tell you they're not breaking the law. But when you try to report crime, you're accused of being a criminal. That's what they're doing. And it's like spiritual warfare. There's so many things that like tie into like psychological torture. And, you know, this is like military type tactics that are used on enemies in war. And people look at stuff at like Guantanamo Bay and torture mechanisms. And it's not just physical. It's not just waterboarding and things like that. And so this is worse because people look at you and they're like, oh, well, you know, you got legs, you got an arm, you know, you're not in a wheelchair. What's wrong with you? And then like, they just think you're crazy and try to write you off. So, yeah, to this day, the protective order is still in effect. And I, unlike him, don't violate it. And so like, he'll call me and text me and he'll be like, why aren't you answering? Come on, stop being a child. Just answer me. Just talk to me. Da, 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 da. And like, I'll tell the police, like, please, like, I can't take this harassment anymore. And it's like, it's not even so much the fact that he talks. It's the fact that they told him if he does it again, he'll be arrested, and he keeps doing it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care that he's talking. I care that he was told that he would be arrested if he does, and he continues to do it and harass me over and over and over and over, and he doesn't care, and nobody will do anything about it. So for me, it's like messed up that these protective orders are being weaponized by abusers. And when you have real victims of domestic violence that try to get help, they're either ignored, dismissed, or arrested or retaliated or treated as the abuser themselves, or they are just left hanging. Like in your situation, it's like you're fighting where you have all the legal things that are saying that, you know, you're supposed to be protected and all these things are supposed to be happening, but they're not doing it. And in my case, it's like all these things that they're doing to me are fraudulent and they shouldn't be doing it, but they won't stop. So it's like,
I believe that there's a level of like scamming here too, and I can just openly say this, but I believe that there's like a level of a scam here because I think with the courts having the ability to basically profit off of these orders, it is allowing these cases to perpetuate into infinite time frame. And so when you actually have like victims that are brave enough to come forth and say, yes, you know, I had broken ribs, or yes, this happened, or yes, my kids were assaulted, and you continue to like talk about it, you know, there's a lot of victim blaming that has gone on in this society. And the other thing too is you go back to the protection order, it's full faith credit, and it clearly states under 18 USC 2265 that the civil law provides that civil or criminal orders issued by a court in one state or Indian tribe shall be accorded full faith by the court by another state. And this law applies to permanent, temporary, and ex parte protections that comply with state statutes. And so, another thing that I am finding is it clearly states that the law does not apply to mutual protection orders. So, an original respondent did a file or a cross petition. If such petition was filed, um, you can't have one. So if a victim is protected under a protection order, the other one legally under the federal law cannot have a protection order opposing the other party. And so for me, it states here too that the registration of an order is not required for law enforcement to enforce it. And so what I'm also seeing, which I believe a task force, you know, of everybody kind of working together would benefit, is basically the aspect is if I go to the state of New Jersey and I file a protection order from the state of Texas, okay, they want it registered in the court. Well, the protection order states I don't have to register it in the court. So if you're violating a protection order from the state of Texas in the state of New Jersey, therein it becomes an interstate crime, which is then federal jurisdiction. So it goes back to the Erie doctrine of like who literally, if jurisdiction started in point A and you go to point Z, who has original jurisdiction? And so these federal laws were put into place to stop the jurisdiction fight. But the issue is local law enforcement has a duty to bring in the higher authorities. And I think a lot of them are afraid to do so because of the fact that they're not sure, due to lack of education, how these policies are supposed to come out. And so for me, I think back to the original question asking you about a task force, I kind of believe that it really needs to be established currently right now in the administration where they do have, you know, professionals and advocates kind of come to a table and you look at this from a national standpoint of the percentage of families that are currently standing here. I mean, how many families are victims of domestic violence that literally have gone full faith to protect their own and now they're sitting on the other side in fear for their life? You know, is it 60%? Is it 50%? Like, what is the measurable rate of this? And then what about the kids that are stuck in the middle? I mean, when they come up and they actually start speaking about what they went through, why would you put them in almost like a psyops mental breakdown with another party that was known for hurting them? You know, and that's scary because I'm seeing it all over the news. And so for me as an advocate, just being the voice for those who don't have one, I find this very scary to even hear your story because it holds people back from speaking up. And I'm sure you've reached out to the senators, and I'm sure you've reached out to Congress, and I'm sure you've done all of these preventative acts trying to get to the correct um, commanding person in charge. And it's like, how do you fix this? Do we petition for everybody to kind of put everything on hold, and you introduce, a congressional bill that actually ties the federal laws to the states, like with sanctions and accountability? Because at that point, you could kind of unweaponize the system and say, okay, well, if this happens and you have 30 days to respond and you don't respond, then this is a sanctionable offense, kind of like they're doing with the tariffs? Or do you make sure, all of the agencies are properly, certified? Because in some states, they don't have an oversight. So, like, they don't have local doesn't go state. They only have local, and then the state doesn't exist because they don't patrol over the local. And I've seen that in maybe like 15, 20 states. So it's like that's kind of where I'm at mentally, is trying to kind of maybe come up with a policy, where everybody's thing comes together, and we kind of approach it as your way is not better than my way. You know, it doesn't matter. We just need to fix this for these kids because it's been a long time for you. It's been a long time for me. And I know anybody watching, I'm sure they've experienced it too. We do a lot of like finger pointing back and forth, but it's like until we fix these policies, is it ever going to be corrected? Because this is over 50 years plus, and it is a game of spiritual warfare, but it's also a level of lack of education and enforcement. And so it's like, what leverage can you put in currently with the administrations to have that? Okay, if this happens, then this is how we go about it. Because if local agencies are required to have higher agencies come in and investigate these federal crimes, and they're not doing it, then how many people are we losing daily due to lack of freaking oversight?
Yeah, and like that's kind of like what I was saying before, where it's like if in Connecticut, where they leave it up to each local PD to have their own policy, then if your protective order is being violated and you live in North Haven, maybe the North Haven police are going to take it seriously based on their policies. But if you live in Waterbury, then there's such a crime-ridden city that's very busy with crime that they're not even going to care. So it's like if there's no uniform procedure that has to be followed with oversight, like if there was like a federal oversight committee or body entity that was specifically for domestic violence and enforcement of, DV orders, like specifically protective orders, those
Probably
would
how
have
welfare
federal.
too, not funny.
Yeah, and like for protection of victims, because like if a victim is a victim of a crime and it's an open investigation, then they shouldn't have to be worried about retaliation and things like that. And like my daughter, like she had 3 or 4 different open investigations for child sexual abuse. And in May of 2023, literally 2 days before I was accused of lying and a judge ordered her to go live with the abuser, she was at the hospital. She made another disclosure of abuse. She said to the PA at Connecticut Children's Hospital in Hartford that Dominic does it to me. Dominic's the one who does it to me, and said that to the lady by herself without me in the room. And they did an exam and all that stuff. And at the end, an officer from police, which was the one who, that's the city that her dad was living in at the time. So they're the ones who were handling it. They came and they picked up all the collection kit of whatever they had collected at the hospital. And she gave us a little card that said, your rights as a crime victim. It had the case number, and it had, okay, you have the right to be reasonably protected from the accused. You have the right to, da, 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 da. Okay. 2 days later, the judge in family court, who never saw any of the evidence, never saw any of the videos, never looked at any of the forensic interview reports or anything, didn't care about any of the evidence I e-filed, accuses me of lying and orders that while there was an open, active investigation into sexual abuse, she ordered that my daughter was going to go leave my home, which was the only home she ever knew, to get forcibly transferred to go be with the dad in his home, while the dad and his son were under active criminal investigation by the police, and she had those rights as a crime victim. So how does she have the right to be reasonably protected from the accused if she's being forcibly trafficked into the home of the accused in the middle of an investigation? Not to mention, how does that compromise the investigation? Go ask any detective, and say, would you remove a victim from their home and force them into the home of the accused in the beginning of an investigation? Yes or no?
No, because
Any
you
detective
no,
would say,
because you
absolutely
would
not.
literally no,
You're
because you would have
compromising your
tampering.
investigation.
Well,
Your
not only
your your
that, you're
witness,
tampering with the witness.
exactly. And the witness is going to be tampered with, your investigation is going to be compromised, and that now you're soiling your investigation. It would be common sense for anybody with common sense to say, no, that's absolutely not. To mention, forget the investigation. Let's not forget about how we should be keeping safe. And if there's a possibility of use, and she's saying this repeatedly, you should err on the side of caution rather than jumping to a conclusion that the mom is some bitter baby mama that just made up a lie, the ex, when in reality the ex is begging for me 24/7 and can't get over the fact that I don't want to be with him, so his next step is to take my kid away. So when
I
his
think
son,
my favorite thing out of that, and I don't mean to cut you off, but my favorite thing out of that entire situation is when the other party who is the accused lobbies false allegation against the protective parent, and they will go all over state hopping just to try to get their story heard, and then the evidence is buried. So it's like these kids, unfortunately, are not being protected. And it's like law enforcement and the law kind of need to go and coincide. And it's like, it's so scary to hear that your daughter had so much courage to finally speak up, and this is where she's at. Like, that just is terrible.
yeah, and she was 3 years old when she started speaking up. And right when they took her, it was 4 days after she turned 4. And now she's about to be 6. And like, she has learned that nobody's going to do anything. Nobody is protecting her. That they're now punishing her by keeping her away from me and trying to erase me from her life, which is even worse. And it's going to backfire later, because do they not realize that none of these crimes have statutes of limitations, even right now? And she can literally be 60 years old and go in the police and press charges. And the brother's 18 now. So he's 18 years old. He wants to act like all tough and harm my child. Well, he's 18, so he can face the full wrath of the law at this point, and he can't hide behind, I'm a minor. No, you're not a minor. You're an adult, and you can be charged as an adult by the age of 16 in Connecticut, even lower than that, depending on the crime and the circumstances. And the fact that he was her babysitter, that the dad was dumping her with the son during his visits, makes it worse of a crime because he was in a position of authority. It's like if it's your teacher or your boss or somebody like that has like some a discrepancy in power over you, it's a higher charge. And if you're over the age of 16 and the victim's under the age of 6, it's also a worse charge. And all of those things apply in our case. And I had filed a petition, change.org/Angelina Maria. Last year, I filed it in May on her birthday, and it already has almost 21,000 signatures. And now that it has so many signatures, I want to try to actually like make formal filings of it and trying to do whatever I have to do to figure out how to move forward with it. I also have my other petition, which was to get the judge removed. That one has like 5,000 signatures. And I just started one yesterday for the new proposed federal law that I wrote, Angelina's Law, which is accountability for negligence, ensuring that every law enforcement officer is not malfeasant in abuse cases. And that's named after her, because I'm asking in this law that it be a federal law that all 50 states have to comply, that all law enforcement must follow these uniform procedures regarding child sexual abuse investigations. And not only would this help avoid another situation like my daughter's ever happening again. But it also brings in, it gives people in my proposed law a private right of action, and doesn't, it takes away immunity from these state actors. And even like the police, like they're not necessarily the state, but they're like working like with the state in conjunction with the state. So therefore it's like, they try to hide under that immunity. But well, I want to get rid of all that, because there's no law that says you have to make a child do a forensic interview. That's the preference of what they do so that they don't lose their case. But in reality, a child's statement and testimony is all the evidence you need. And rather than letting my child have a chance to be heard, she was silenced and then taken away from me and punished. And now it's been a year since I've seen her and her sister, and they're trying to put me in jail. And like many, many other women are being put in jail every day in all across the country. I know somebody else, a whistleblower from Stamford, Connecticut. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison for a breach of peace. Go look up what a breach of peace means. It's literally the lowest petty charge you can get. And was sentenced to 1 year in prison. They charged him and arrested him for retaliation because he was whistleblowing about mass corruption and fraud happening in Stamford involving elected officials, and he had proof, and he was working for the city. He was a city engineer for like many years, and he was basically a whistleblower that they were cutting corners with safety in order to maximize profit. So like think about like building department have codes that you have to follow for safety. They were illegally skirting around these safety things and putting people in danger. And he blew the whistle about this, and then they retaliated, started arresting him and all this crazy stuff. And like for somebody who has no criminal record to be sentenced to 1 year in prison, and now they're trying to put more years on him, and they put him in a Whiting forensic hospital for the criminally insane in Connecticut, forcibly injected him with meds that they wouldn't tell him what it is. If he refused to take it, they would inject him with it. Like, this is what they're doing to people. And you think like, we're like Maria, like, do we really have no rights anymore? And it's true, because like, if people are not aware of this, number one, two, if nobody's doing anything to like stop it, because the people that try to speak up get retaliated against, then what can we really do? I think everybody has to support each other. Like how you were saying, you want to make this legislation, like, that sounds good. Like,
I want to be able to take all of the federal bills, like Caden's law, Peaky's law, your daughter's bill, the Brandon Act, the Vanessa Gillian Act. I want to put them all together under one, because there are so many kids that we have lost in this generation and before us. And I want to call it the Valkyrie Bell Act, and I want to take it to the Armed Senate Committee, and I want it passed from the veterans aspect of things. So then that way there are measurable things, there are enforcement, there is training. Because if we continually do it everybody separately, what's happening is they're passing these bills at a state level, and by the time they get to a federal level, they're blowing them off because they're not being combined. And if we combine them all, you then now, in a lot of situations from the military, you now have the military UCMJ backing it with the veteran affairs. Then you have the oversight with the federal laws, and then you have the arm kind of leverage in the state. And so it's, you look at abusive litigation, I think Rhode Island has it. Not every state has abusive litigation. So all of these laws have to be passed federally, but we have to do them individually, and then they have to all be brought together, like an accountability act. Like they did a military accountability petition a long time ago. I believe it was over COVID. Well, now we're at the Military Dependent Family Accountability Act. Now we're at the American Family Accountability Act. Like, we as parents are the voice for our kids, and our kids don't have voices. And I agree with you that a lot of the speaking out, it causes a ton of issues. I also think, personally, there's a way to go about things. I have found that a lot of people that are speaking out, that are ending up in these situations, don't realize that, like, the way that they verbiage things, that makes all the difference. Like, I have seen, God, I can't even tell you how many people, and I'm like, oh, well, if you didn't verbiage it that way, it wouldn't sound that way. And I think education from the advocacy aspect needs to happen. Like there needs to be that oversight committee. There needs to be these proposals because we can talk for hours on our personal experiences and what we've lived. But at the end of the day, I'm proud of you for making a bill in, regards to your daughter. The other thing is there are bills for sexual assault and DV. I learned, I think it was like a couple days ago, there's a phone number where you can like have your partner or somebody call and you find out if a person has a DV record or has a sexual assault record. The thing is, there's a lot of things that are put into place, but nobody is aware that they exist. And so by the time like victims go through these systems, I believe there's a law like Marcy's law is North Carolina for sexual assault. So you have all of these things put into place. There's no enforcement. And so it's getting that enforcement kind of set in a way to where it's like, if you do A, then B and C will happen. But it's also kind of gathering everybody's voices because the other thing that's scary for me, and I'm a very outspoken person, is the fact that there's so many similarities across the nation in these stories, you know? And so when we speak about our abusers weaponizing the domestic violence system and it looks bad for the victims, there are victims, unfortunately, that have weaponized the system too. So it's like there needs to be like a check in the box system to show, yes, my kid was sexually assaulted. No, I wasn't. Like there needs to be measurable aspects of things because in a lot of situations, and I think it's sad too, is if they can abuse the situation, it's being abused on both sectors. So it's really making it also hard for local law enforcement to do their job because I think they have a lot of overlapping of things. So, like, if you were to take a file and you have black and white proof of forensic investigations, that's one thing. But I think a lot of people are using this in the wrong manner. So I'm hoping with the current administration and everything going on that this will kind of be one of the main forefronts, even including an executive order potentially, because there needs to be an oversight. There needs to be accountability, but the accountability comes from within too, especially from the spiritual warfare aspect. Like we have to heal within to be able to help somebody else. Like somebody once said to me, if you were going to save yourself or somebody else, where do you put your oxygen mask? Well, typically I would say the other person. Well, and in our situations and so many others, we have to put our own oxygen masks on. We have to be able to stand fearlessly in the pursuit of justice. And as you and I both know, justice was once blind, but I think she's starting to see now. And your background was originally law, like you were going to school to be an attorney, and I think that's kind of insane and crazy and cool too, because it's like the laws, how things work. So no matter where you are, you're doing the best you can. I just would like to see, especially in your situation, like I'd like to see the kids come home because you are such an inspiration. Like you've been doing this for an awful long time. So, you know, it's been really nice to watch your journey because of the fact that like you are so bold and courageous in this.
Thank you. And, I really think that like the solution is getting like this all to become like enforceable federal laws that are like with oversight on a federal level, because the states are not doing a good job. When you leave things to the states and there's no oversight over it, it's a recipe for disaster. And, speaking on some like existing federal laws that are designed to help or whatever with child protection, the Violence Against Women Act, CAPTA, Child Abuse Protection and Treatment Act, Violence Against Women Act, like those, they're flawed. And mainly what they do is provide free money through the form of grants from the federal government to the states, who are then supposed to use that money to help with domestic violence and all this kind of child protection and stuff. But in reality, if you call statewide legal and you try to ask them for help, they're going to reroute you to, New Haven Legal Aid or Hartford Legal Aid. And then they're going to tell you, okay, well, we can't give you an attorney, but we can do a 1-hour meeting with you to discuss your case, but you have to sign an NDA saying that we can possibly testify against you and it's not confidential. Like, and then if you look at their books, they're getting millions and millions of dollars in free money from the federal government in form of grants that are supposed to be incentive payments for states who are providing victims with services and free legal aid and shelters and all these resources, which they're not. And like, if you try to get like even like the victims advocates in the court, as soon as I get arrested and there was a dual protective order and now he's the victim in one case and I'm the victim in the other, and we both had identical protective orders protecting us, as soon as that happened, the victim advocate who was supposed to be my victim advocate helping me like turned on me and like didn't want to help me with anything. So it's like how you said, like if it's illegal under federal law to put protective orders like that, why are they doing it on a regular basis? And Connecticut's been doing that for more than 20 years. And they have a very bad track record when it comes to DV. Like that lady, Tracy, who was it? Tracy Thurman, that was from Torrington, Connecticut, that was like paralyzed because the husband like beat her so bad, and the police kept saying they weren't going to do anything until literally like she was like paralyzed and like almost dead. Then they decided to arrest him. And like after that, Connecticut was supposedly going to be hard on DV, but they're not. They're arbitrary with how they do it, and it becomes a really big problem when then it's like, what are you supposed to do? You can't. If you call the FBI or the DOJ or try to do something with the federal government, they'll say, oh, you got to deal with the state. You try to deal with the state, they don't police themselves. You try to go in federal court, they'll say, oh, well, there's no private cause of action for violations of VAWA. So that means you can't sue if they violate your rights. So what's the point of having your rights if you can't sue? If they have immunity where they can't be criminally liable and you have no private cause of action to sue for civil remedies, you basically have no rights at that point. So I think what you're saying makes like perfect sense, is not just having all these laws and bills, but making a new body entity to be specifically tasked, like a task force is a good word, to do that specific thing. And they can print money all they want and we can afford it, So it's like if they were to just specifically carve out a section to do that, like the FBI, the DOJ, all these things, those are made up by the government. You know what I mean? They can make up whatever new task force they want. So I think that also, like, I had tried originally to propose a bill in 2023 to the state, and the state rep, Joe Hacha from Bristol, he was actually like had done some ads in the newspaper I had, and I had told him about what was going on with my case, and he said, oh yeah, write up your proposed bill, give it to me, I'll introduce it at the next session, yada yada. And I did, and the bill that I gave should have got bipartisan support, but he told me that they decided that they don't even want to vote on it at all, that they're just going to ignore it. So it's like, I've realized like the state is not going to do anything. And that's when I'm like, all right, I have to, take this to a federal level. And then I tried to sue in federal court, and they're like, oh, everybody's immune. Even if somebody dies, you can't sue them. And it's like, what? How is this legal? You know what I mean? And then they find these loopholes, and that's how it becomes like a trafficking ring, where there's another girl from Connecticut. The same judge took her daughter away. She did the same kind of forensic interview, and in hers, she made graphic, detailed disclosures of sexual abuse by the father, and they gave the father custody and put the mom on supervised visits. And then they arrested her and charged her with 12 felony counts of risk of injury to a minor and 3 counts of lying to police and custodial interference, telling that the fact that she reported it to the police and took her daughter to be evaluated for sexual abuse was child abuse. They're saying reporting suspected child abuse is abuse now in Connecticut. And the same people are involved. So it's like, and also people don't realize too, is like the longer that they keep these cases going, the more money that they're getting, because each case that is open, they're milking it. And like, it's just sad. So I feel like there's so much waste and fraud and corruption. And like, if Doge looked into what was going on with the CAPTA, VAWA,
any
4D,
all states at that point.
all of that, every state is abusing it, and kids are getting treated as commodities. Like, kids are not commodities. And if children have rights as a victim and crime victims' rights, it doesn't matter your age. You shouldn't take them away from the parent who reported abuse and give it to the abuser and isolate them and torture the parent for trying to protect their kid. And if I have a right to protect my daughter and not bring her back to an abusive household, and it's my duty under the law, that if you know that federal law says that if bringing your child back to the other parent is going to expose them to harm, then you have a duty not to bring them there, because you have a duty to protect your kid. If you know it's going to endanger them and you still drop them off, doesn't matter court order what, you are on the hook. So, but in Connecticut, they'll charge you with custodial interference and arrest you and put you in prison.
That's
And
in any state, though. That's in any state,
not
and that's the problem.
every state's got their own laws, though. That's the bigger problem, is like, these protective orders that you're talking about are enforceable in all 50 states, but regular laws for each state are not. So you can be in one state where not following all the terms of your court order could be considered custodial interference and grounds for an arrest. Or you can be in Connecticut where the only thing that is considered custodial interference is if you don't give the child back. So if it says that, dad has to take the child to church and dad doesn't bring her, nothing happens. But if it says, dad has to bring the child back at 5:00 on Sunday and he doesn't do it, then they could try to arrest him. So it's like, why is it that only that one specific thing is considered custodial interference? And if you have court orders being issued by family court, but then no aspect of the order is really enforceable, because the police will just be like, oh, well, it's a civil matter. Oh, you have to go back to court and file a motion for contempt because this is a civil matter. Like, if I had $1 for every time I heard it's a civil matter, like, and it's not. Because when my ex goes to make the report, it's a criminal matter right away. Warrants get issued right away. And so it's like, okay, why do the laws only apply to some people and not others? That sounds like discrimination, which it is. And people who have disabilities, people who aren't rich, people who don't have connections, people who are considered like not part of their, because they look at it as like, oh, if you can get one of these expensive lawyers, the lawyers are gonna, go have lunch with the judge and, pulls their strings. But if you're trying to do it the honest way, and if you don't have money, and that's the other thing, like, it shouldn't be like justice is only possible for people who can afford it. Like, if you're a victim of a crime, you should be allowed to get a free lawyer as a crime victim to help you. There was no lawyer for me, but he could get a free one as a criminal. So it's like, why does a criminal get more rights than the victim? Doesn't make sense. These are all things that need to be changed.
I think it's so crazy to me because, like, if you look at all 50 states, and I've unfortunately, don't disclose a lot personally about my case just because of the severity of it, but I can tell you from other victims that I've met in other states, their laws are very similar to New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Vermont. But the problem is, we keep talking about this oversight in this task force. It's a level of 2. They would end up still financially benefiting from a task force, because then you would have the education. You would have been bringing in more revenue. So, like, the fact that they haven't established it yet baffles me. The fact that, the American Bar Association is very corrupt in itself, that's another thing. But for me, it's like, if Hawaii has the same laws and their county and, let's say, Honolulu states, X, Y, and Z for filing for custody, but that usurps the state law and the federal law, there is no oversight. And a lot of the issues that this country is currently facing in these cases is, you do have a right to file a false reporting act claim if, that your rights have been violated. You do have a right to the intentional infliction of emotional distress claim in federal court. You have the ability to exercise other rights, but the problem is, we all kind of, and I wholeheartedly believe this, like, we all kind of have to petition Congress at this point to kind of come in and share all of our different stories in a confidential manner and ask them for that ability to have an oversight committee. Because unfortunately, and I will say this again, there are people that claim that they were abused and they weren't, and they've ruined it for people that have actually suffered these terrible ferocities of hell. And so it's like we need measurable accountability. We need people to literally have, for example, in the military, show me where it's PTSD over domestic violence. Because if you cognitively disassociate and you put your hands on somebody else, that's domestic violence, right? So where is the immeasurable accountability, like measurable wicked of all of this? And we are at a pivotal point in this country right now where I wholeheartedly believe that a lot of these kids and a lot of these families that have gone through hell over and over and again are going to be able to be reunited. It's just a matter of time. But, just like the J6ers, these families that are speaking up, like, where's the pardons for that? Can we as a whole address this as a country, as the United States of America? Can we, as parents, put our personal differences aside? Because I know, like, in the advocating world, everybody is, it's me, me, me. Can we all put that aside and come together and say it's about our kids? It's about us as a collective, because I think they're weaponizing that too. As I've seen a lot of stories where, like, people, if you go, well, tell me about so and so. Oh, I don't talk to them because of this. If we could pull that back and realize that, like, we are all in the same spiritual warfare, I think a lot of changes would happen quicker too.
Yeah. And like, I don't like how, it seems like domestic violence and child abuse cases get treated differently than any other case. For example,
Yep.
if you were going to go to the police today and make a report and you make a sworn statement under penalty of perjury and you write a statement saying that, my friend Sarah came to my house yesterday and she, you know, threw something at my car and damaged my car. Let's just say that you damaged your own car. Let's say you smashed your own window and then you went to the police and you said, Sarah did it. I'm going to write a statement on Sarah. You don't have a video of her doing it. You have a picture of the smashed window, but the only proof that you have is what? Your statement, right? So what's going to happen? If you write that statement and sign it under penalty of perjury for criminal mischief or whatever, trespassing, whatever you're saying she did, they will arrest her. They will make a warrant and they'll arrest her because they didn't see her do it, but you went there and you made a sworn statement. So why is it that if you go to the police and make a sworn statement saying you were abused or that your child was abused, why is it that there's not automatically an arrest? And I understand that everybody says, well, people lie and people will say this. People lie about everything. People lie about attempted murder. Like people lie about any crime that is there. Anytime somebody can get arrested for a crime, somebody could lie and falsely accuse them and get them arrested. So if that's the case, then the reason why that they're able to, it doesn't automatically mean that the person will go to jail is because then the opportunity to go to court and, through the court and the legal judicial process, they can have the case dismissed and they can prove their innocence and whatever. So if that's the case, then why not let all of these cases go through the proper legal process? Because like if somebody's like really, if they accuse you of lying and you're arrested, you're not going to get a consent, right? You can prove your case in court. But if you choose not to arrest the person at all, because arresting them at all, oh well, maybe they might get a lawyer and the case, so therefore we're not going to arrest them. You're completely denying the person their due process because that victim has the right to the due process. And that's a problem that I have with what they're doing. Because like it's like if you say, oh well, it's my husband that abused me, they'll be like, well, it's your husband. Oh, my child was sexually abused by the dad. Oh well, it's her dad. Like, oh, it's whatever, we're not going to do anything about it. But if you say, some random homeless guy on the street attacked my child and raped them, you can guarantee they're going to arrest the guy right away. If it's some stranger that attacks you, they're going to arrest them. But if it's a family member, i.e. domestic violence or abuse within your home, whether it's sexual or not, why is it that they're treating it different? You know what I mean? And it should be treated 10 times with more protection, because then you're so much more vulnerable. Like if you live with the person, if the person's going to come after you, because it's like they know where you live, they know where you work, it's emotionally charged, and like a restraining order is only a piece of paper if no one's going to enforce it. So these are all things that people need to realize. And if you think about how our government works, if the judicial branch is not doing anything and there's no oversight, and the legislative branch isn't doing anything to make new laws and things like that to try to fix it, then what's left? The executive branch. And obviously on the state level, it would be the governor, which in Connecticut, I believe is corrupt and involved in this. So what's the federal level is the president. And the president has powers to issue executive orders, to establish task forces, to do things like this. And the job of the executive branch is to enforce the other branches not doing what they're supposed to do. So at this point, I think that everybody needs to come together and basically petition to the intention, the Trump administration, these Kash Patel and Pam Bundy and all these new people that he's put in these positions to do this. These are who we need to be talking to now, because making judicial complaints in federal court, they'll tell you, oh no, judicial immunity, oh, the judges are immune, so on and so that's kind of where my focus is at now. And if they can uncover so quickly all of this fraud and stuff, like you were saying, 300-year-olds getting Social Security. I just read yesterday 10-year-olds were getting PPP loans and COVID relief. How are 10-year-olds you got 10-year-olds getting PPP loans and dead people getting Social Security? Welcome to America. So yeah, I'm tired of it. I want to see change on a big level, and at least if nothing I try works, at least I can show that I tried at the end of the day, and maybe inspire other people to try too. Because if everyone stays quiet, then it's going to keep happening. If people speak up more and more and more, that public pressure, it's going to be a bipartisan issue, because it doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. Everybody believes that children and victims of crimes should be protected.
I agree with you. I also think too, the aspect of tying all of these bills with all of these kids' names under one bill would be also probably the best way, because at the bottom of the bill, I think it needs to have in remembrance of, for the kids that are no longer here, for the moms like Catherine Kavanaugh that are no longer here, for the dads that are no longer here. And I think if it's done in that manner, where they call it whatever they want to call it, whether it's Valkyrie Bell or any random thing, Kids First, American Families Act, and you revamp something. I think we are at that pinnacle moment to where your bill, Peaky's Law, Caden's Law, I think there's a couple other ones. If they're all brought together, I think it's really going to make the changes necessary, because the other caveat that most people don't talk about is if you are a military family and you are dealing with civilian matters, the UCMJ and the military is required to file their protection orders with the FBI. They are required to file them with local law enforcement. So when you have an active duty military family going through this and they don't even know their own procedures, that's a problem, because then when you start IGing and you go to the DOD and you're like, wait a minute, there's a no contact order from the military, that's required to be filed in family court, that's required to be filed in the civilian sector. And when you have people like NCIS who do these forensic investigations, they are required under their policies to notify the feds. So it's there are a lot of kids across this nation, regardless of which way you look at this coin, being affected. And I think if you can kind of tie them together to where there is that oversight task force, you can make sure that the military MPOs are being registered. You can make sure that, there's a difference. Take away the civil versus criminal restraining orders. That's another thing that's nation. Like you can have a civil restraining order, then you can have a criminal restraining order. Take that away. Do one restraining order, like one subject of it. If you go and file victim right violations, let's say in the state of South Carolina, the DA is required to literally take that and then push it up. So make sure as a whole in a bill that like you are making measurable things that can be done in like 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, because it's such a process that has to get undone. At this point, we, the people, really kind of have to come together on every aspect of it. We have to get the veterans aspect because there is no Brandon Act for the veterans. There is no sexual assault bill. You have the Gold Star Protection Act. You have the Uniform Protection Act, which is the military's aspect of protections. So if you take all of them and you combine them into one under an executive order, a lot of the back and forth between the states and the governors and the attorney generals, it kind of holds that measurable weighing of the scales of this is our nation's accountability and this is what we need. And then you need the education portion of it. Like take Fleet and Family out of it because Fleet and Family is required to uphold all social services investigations, but they don't. They pass it off to local. So it's like you're not even protecting our families that choose to serve or that have died on behalf of this country or that are 100% disabled because of their service connected injuries. Like the vulnerability of those families, unfortunately, is a higher rate than normal civilian families. And so we just need education and enforcement. And we need to be able to talk about this, and we need to make sure like social workers are nationally credentialed. And if they're not credentialed, they shouldn't be crossing state lines. Like basic common sense. Because right now in this culture, make it make sense does not exist. And like you could pull 9 other guests onto this call right now, and their stories would almost mirror yours or be similar to mine. But then there's subtle differences. And it's all in how we've like approached each aspect of this journey. But together, your situation, mine, somebody down the streets, anybody else, if you put us all at a round table in a room, I could ask you, where did you go wrong in your case? What could you have filed differently? What was your experience with law enforcement? What was your experience going to a high level of legislative officials? And if you literally had somebody write, let's say 50 people's experiences down, out of those 50, they're all going to get to the same ending, but at a different time frame where like if you put everybody together, you could literally rebuild it. And so I think it would be exciting to kind of see everybody come to the table with Pam and Cash and everybody and literally be like, listen, we have lived this. This has been hell. We're not going to personally say what our experiences are as a whole, but this is where it's broken. And we need you guys to fix it. We need tangible federal warrants. We need investigations of this, and we need these American children home because the US is one out of 3 countries, and I believe it's 3 and it may be more, that never signed the UN Children's Bill of Rights. And we have human rights too that are not being taken into consideration. So when you put all of that together, if you went to the Attorney General out of the last administration for victims of crime rights and you sent your package, I bet you 90% of them were never even opened. So it's like that's where we need to literally go back to is it's not within the last 5 years or within the last 10 years. It has been literally like being pushed over and over and over the edge. And unfortunately, we end up blaming local law enforcement or state government officials because they don't understand it. So we're expecting them to understand a system that there's no education. There's no, hey, by the way, this is address confidentiality. All of your court filings are sealed. You don't exist. This is your rights to your kids. If we as victims or survivors that have gone through this have to then educate our legislative aspect of it, then that unfortunately is our purpose. But we have to get to the end where our kids come home and we're able to heal and rebuild without the fear of speaking out. and without the fear of retaliation in whatever form that may be, because sometimes it's as little as, your iPhone getting hacked. Like, let's be real, and nobody's crazy for telling their story because they've lived it. They have the proof. So we have to, petition too to stop the victim shaming and blaming, because it's like, why would we make all of this up? Like, why would we, as parents, go as far as we have, speaking out to protect the ones that we love? Like, we had those kids. We want a balanced relationship. Yeah, we didn't maybe choose our partners correctly, but you know, there's a level of there has to be a balance, because the alienation at this point, the erasing of these families, it is gone so lacklustered, not looked at. It is causing it's causing these kids to then have mental health problems. Like, we are perpetuating the poor mental health of our own children in this country. And so I just want to kind of see all of these bills come together. I want to see the ability for an enforcement. I want to be able to sit there and be like, yeah, that's a great idea. But on paper, this looks great. But how do you plan on actually enforcing court records being sealed because you're a victim? How do you enforce a confidential name change without it being leaked? Like, what is your enforcement for that? Do you have to go back to that court and file that something happened and X, Y, and Z? Like, can we cut down the paper trail here and like make it a direct, like, from the start to the finish, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think that, your idea about doing a federal task force, I think, is the best idea at this point, because like we said, it doesn't matter how many laws and bills we enact if they're not being enforced. So I think first things first, trying to, get public support and reaching out to senators and congressmen and federal government and the Trump administration, demanding that they establish a task force with the specific intent of enforcing domestic violence orders and child protection, anti-trafficking, anti-DV task force. And then all these existing laws, maybe then, okay, if there's a violation and the police don't do anything, you can contact the task force and they'll launch an investigation and see why they didn't do it. And, then there's, legal aid where you can get assistance, an advocate, a lawyer, whatever. Like, even going to the police, like, there should be advocates at every police department for victims, and they're not there. They don't even
There
give
should
you
be
an option.
cameras. There should be cameras for every social worker that enters a home. There should be cameras in every courtroom. Like, there
Yeah.
needs to be tangible stuff.
Accountability. And the fact that they literally, like, they get money, they get millions of dollars for the purpose of giving these advocates and improving these things, and they just take the money and they don't actually use it for any of these. So that's another thing that a task force can look into and do, like an annual audit. Like, okay, we gave the state of Connecticut $50 million last year, for example, for DV training on their officers. Okay, let's audit them and see, what did they actually do? Oh, all they did was one event where it was at a country club and everybody got a $300 meal. Okay, cancel their funding. Like, that's what they need to do. And what you said before about, like, the UN, it's true. Like, not just about the Child's Bill of Rights. Like, United States is one of the only countries who doesn't sign, like, they don't ratify, like, any of the treaties about, like, torture, about, like, human rights. And, like, even Afghanistan ratified it and we didn't. So it's, like, sad. And also, like, with the Hague, like,
Yeah.
if a child is wrongfully removed from the United States and goes in another country, you can file a petition in the Hague to bring them back, but not the other way around. So if they're wrongfully retained in the US and you're in another country and you try to file, the US is not a signatory to that. And so it's like, and now, like, they're dropping out of, like, the UN, and they're, like, causing problems, like, all over with all the other countries. But these other countries are doing way more for their people than what US is. And, like, for a so-called civilized superpower, best country in the world, like they say, it's like, why are we not even giving basic human rights to our people and our children? Like you mentioned, the mental health. I think that that's deliberate, because they want everybody to be big pharma patients and mental health issues. And that's our future generation. These are the people who are going to be the doctors taking care of us when we're older. These are the people who are going to be leading us as in politics and things like that. And so it's like, if they are growing up with no parents and forcibly being removed from good parents and forced to go in abusive homes and their voices are being buried, like, what is that going to do to our future generation? And look at our generation now. Why do you think people have so many problems? Because look at what we went through in our childhood. Look at how our lives were. And now we're parents and it's like exponentially worse for our kids. And so like something needs to change. And nobody used to talk about sexual abuse and stuff. And like, it was so taboo, like you couldn't even bring it up. But now more and more people are talking. And same thing with losing custody and domestic violence. And like women used to just stay. It wasn't easy to leave. It's still not easy to leave, but at least you can speak about it and not be judged for 20 years ago. And that's what is helping society kind of shift to like saying like, okay, wait, like everybody's a human. All of us are humans and nobody has the right to like take away your right to be a mother or the right to be safe or a right for a child to be safe or have their mother or father, you know? So, if you start, working on trying to make a formal petition about this task force, like I'll work with you on that and we can work on that together, try to get other people to support it. And if we get everybody to sign our letter and send it out, like, and keep making posts about it on social media, like that'll get their attention. And who's going to say no to that? Only the people who are doing fraud.
I
Which is
think the hardest thing for me is like as a mom, when you have kids, you never want them to experience what you experienced as a kid. And then when you watch them go through similar situations, you're right, it is hard to leave. You do talk about funding, but let's look at like the aspect of these nonprofits for domestic violence misallocating funding for, let's say, housing. So let's say you're in Washington and you flee for your life with a protection order to the state of Texas. Where is homeless housing? Is the ability for these kids to be able to start over? Like you're entitled to crime rights restitution within a reasonable time frame. Why, when you go for housing or you go for food or you go for your basic needs, though, there is nothing. So where is all the money going? I mean, it must be nice to have galas and throwing everything together, regardless of what state you're in. But at the end of the day, there are families living in their car every single day. There are moms that have fled domestic violence that don't have their kids. There are dads that have fled domestic violence that don't have their kids. They are sleeping on the side of the road under bridges because they literally lost everything because it was intentionally taken. And so it's like we have to also advocate for the aspect of the mental health and the homelessness because a lot of us were put through that situation because they claim to have resources. It doesn't really matter what state. Some states are worse than other, but most of them kind of evenly weigh on the scale. Like unfortunately, Florida is better maybe with housing than North Carolina. But the issue is, for example, I believe it's North Carolina, they have the governor's crime commission and task force. Well, the counties have funding for death of a child, but they're supposed to have a specific amount advocated for domestic violence. So these local actual nonprofits that quote unquote give you advocates don't give you advocates, and that's the thing. I think the other thing people don't talk about is people will drop domestic violence charges out of fear for the retaliation. And then once they drop them, they're then retaliated, getting the protection orders against them and seeing charges against them. So it's like, there needs to be, a state enforcement too from a federal level that if you are charged with the DV Act, you cannot drop those charges. Like if you don't want to go forth, they have to prosecute with what they have. They cannot literally allow a victim to drop the charges because it takes 7 times for a DV victim to leave. 7. Like on average, you're going to go back, you're going to say he or she changed. 7. So if you finally bring that forth, they need to stop the victims from dropping the charges because the financial strain, the coercive control, like the definition of domestic violence needs to be revamped too, because they only typically talk about physical. They don't talk about emotional, they don't talk about mental, they don't talk about financial, they don't talk about like the whole body well-being. And I think if that definition changed, that would also be helpful too. But then it's like we really, as a whole, as parents, have to come together. And that's where I'm at is like, I've talked to so many people with so many ideas. And like, we need a task force that has like law enforcement, that is federal law enforcement that can go in and investigate these state entities or these state people. We need um, forensic investigators to pull up documents and make sure that like your signature is actually your signature and not an electronic pen. Like, we need social workers that have specific backing, maybe in like military sector, this is PTSD. And we need mental health professionals and advocates, like advocates that can speak on their victims' behalf, not in an attorney capacity, because here's the thing, we can go and hire attorneys all we want, and we need attorneys, we do. But at the end of the day, a victim is more comfortable talking with somebody that's gone through the issue. And then you have the council who really needs to kind of step in and weigh in on the laws. So, like, if a victim is too afraid to speak, if somebody is an advocate under the ADA accommodations allowed in court, you should be able to have somebody be able to say, Your Honor, this is what she means. But I'm not acting in the capacity of counsel. I'm acting in the capacity of, you know, she's explaining it to me and it's not going to sound right to you, kind of thing, if that
Yeah, and
makes
like
sense.
it's interesting that you brought up about like changing the definition of domestic violence, because in 2021 Connecticut passed Public Act 21-78, which is also known as Jennifer's Law. And Jennifer Law created a new definition for domestic violence, which includes coercive control. And it stated that, also coercion is a crime in the state of Connecticut. And they define it as either basically forcing somebody to do something they have the right not to do, or forcing them not to do something they have the right to do. And I've tried to report that many times. The police would not make an arrest. I've tried to cite coercive control to get a DV restraining order. And in my family court case, they didn't care. And so like the lady, Jennifer Dulos, who it's named after, she was murdered by her husband. And the husband never, ever put his hands on her until one day he murdered her and chopped up her body and threw him in different trash cans all around Hartford with his girlfriend, who's currently in jail. I think she got like 13 years or something, which is crazy because she helped him do a murder and his lawyer helped too. And the guy killed himself and he never even got held accountable. And so like that case was a very high conflict, high profile, high income divorce that got national attention when the lady went missing. And, it's like sad that like though she had 5 kids as well. And now 5 kids have no parents now. And the fact is that like they changed the law and it's been 4 years and they're still not enforcing it in Connecticut. The judges are not enforcing it. They're ignoring it. And the only time I've seen Jennifer's Law get applied is when it's an abuser trying to claim that they're the victim and using it as an opposite on the real victim. So, that goes back to what you said, the task force, like having this executive task force that is only for that purpose. And also like I hear about housing a lot and how like these like DV shelters are like always full, or like they turn you away, or like they're mean and stuff like that. And like I think like one of the best solutions to that is hotels. There's so many hotels in every state. And if the government literally went to the hotels and was like, oh, we'll have a contract with you where we'll pay, for 50,000 rooms, if your rate is $100 per room, we'll buy in bulk for the rate of 50 a room. And we have a contract with you that whenever we send somebody to your hotel for domestic violence victim, you keep it private and don't release their information, and you put them up in your hotel. They have
Yep.
heat, they'll have everything. If they have to stay there for weeks, months, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, maybe there's not apartments and houses to rent, but there's so many hotels, and they can literally just pay to put these victims up in those hotels. And if they can't find one in Connecticut, find one in New York or Mass on the border, and have these funds available so that, victims can call and say, like, it's an emergency. I need housing right now for me and my two kids. We're fleeing domestic violence. You should be able to then tap into those resources to say, okay, we're going to connect you with one of our partner hotels to get you in a safe room. And they can have maybe a whole floor where it's only for these domestic violence people, so that regular people aren't going there for privacy purposes. And then the people can be comfortable and have a hot shower and stuff like that. Why can't they do that? They can give millions of dollars for nonsense, but they just waste the money. Why can't they use, if they had somebody using the money the right way, they would have lots of money left over. They wouldn't need more because they have enough. They're just choosing to allocate it on stuff that's not effective. So I think the people who've been through it can have like insight. Like you and I, like, we can say, like, okay, what do we wish that we had that would have helped us, And those are the things that we should advocate that they start doing. And so I think that you have like some really good ideas. And if like maybe we connect with some of the other people that I've talked to that are also have groups and advocacy things that they're doing. And, if we're doing this on a federal level, we can get everybody to get on board because it affects all of us. And we need to start making uniform federal like laws that get rid of this whole thing where the states are just doing whatever they want. And it's like, okay, you're in one state, the law's this, you're in another state, this. Like, no, like just like in all the states, they have to read you your Miranda warning when you get arrested. That's because it was the Supreme Court ruled that. So now it's like, just like with gay marriage, it was ruled legal in all the states by the Supreme Court. So like that applies everywhere. We need to have the same thing with this, where it applies everywhere. And, if your rights are violated, you can file a specific lawsuit just for that, and there's no immunity. And these people should be treated like at the top of priority, especially like, DV, it's like so complicated. Like you said, 7 times to leave. That's the average. Some people stay 20, 30 times. Some people stay all these years. Like I have one woman, she reached out to me. She found me on TikTok and she said that her husband's like a chief of police and she won't leave because knows what would happen if she does. And so it's like her daughter's like in her 20s. Like, so it's like this woman has stayed in a abusive marriage for decades because she knows that if she tries to leave, she would get ruined, and he's got the connections and pull and power. And so it's like, some women stay because of financial, and other people have the trauma bond. And like you mentioned, like, okay, PTSD, but I think that like nobody should have to worry about not being able to afford therapy and mental health treatment. Like it should be free for everybody. And if you can't afford it, there should be grants. If they don't want to make it free for everybody, they should make some grants so that if you can't afford it, you can get it for free. And same with lawyers. There should be no more pay to play to get justice. Justice is for everybody. And the courts shouldn't be charging money. Police shouldn't charge you money for a body cam or a report or anything. Because it's like, what if you can't afford it? Then you don't get it. So how is that fair? It's not fair. And that's unconstitutional. It violates the 14th Amendment of equal protection. If a rich person can access justice, but I can't because I'm poor, it violates my rights. Therefore, if they remove the fee, anyone can freely access it. But they won't do that because it's all a game. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's why we need to demand that they change and start slowly changing everything until our kids are safe and victims of TV are safe. Yeah, exactly. Because so many kids are getting killed and women are getting murdered from their husbands and boyfriends. And it's like, it's not getting any better. So I think that, you're doing a lot to try to make positive change. And I think also like with your like military background, you can also like, bring more to the table from that aspect of the needs of people who are military families. And, I think they also have, like you said, like a separate jurisdiction. So that's more on a federal level. So it should be like one uniform across the board for everybody, easily accessible, like an app where you can just like enter your evidence and make your complaint, and then they get back to you within 24 hours or something like.
Yep. I think there needs to be sanctions too. Like, I think there needs to be accountability, because I think the hardest thing is, we go into Article 3 judges, we talk about all of this. Like, people want, when they grow up and they're like, I want to be an attorney. I love Elle Woods to death. Like, I do. But it's so funny because literally you want to be an attorney to make a change. And when you get into the field, whether it's pre-law and politics, or you go to law school, or you get into advocating, what you realize is the change is a level of pay to play, and it's not really a change. So like, this is so random, but I literally watched Legally Blonde 2 like a week ago, and I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, make this make sense. Like, when you go and you lobby for the changes for the laws, why has nobody petitioned the Supreme Court for a federal task force, for a state task force? Because if people started communicating and we started having similar resources like the VA had for like counseling and family services, I think a lot of the American people would be a little bit more like, in tune with themselves. I think there would be a lot less of the DV issues, because I think with the judges talking to the attorneys, they have these conferences all over the US. Domestic violence, UCCJEA, who has jurisdiction? Well, you remove the Erie Doctrine from law books. Like, we have to be clear with our purpose and our passion. And when you have so many people that can come to the table and be like, tell us why we're all here, and it's the same situation all the way around that table, that's your motion, that's your kind of internal thing going, all right, now it's time that we change this. But we can't change it. Like, I can't stand here and say, oh, I'm going to change X, Y, and Z, and you can't stand wherever you're at and say, I'm going to change A, B, C, and D, and then so and so's going to do in the middle of the alphabet, because that's what they're preying on. They can't see us all come together. And when we all come together and we all sit here and we're like, I like that part of your bill, you like this part of this bill, I like this, and you like that, and you put it all together, what you'll find is a lot of the bills like Caden and Peaky's law, coercive control, Jennifer's law, your bill, anything else, they're all going to mirror one another. And so if you could put it all together in a cute little, like, nice package bow, I think a lot of changes would happen in a fairly reasonable time frame. I also think the level of accountability would be those state entities would have to be accountable at the federal. So if they were found in violation of money laundering or RICO or whatever it may be, then they have to sanctionably pay that back. And we got to take the families out of this and put them first. And we've got to be able to regain the faith in the system, because I think the thing that's pushed me forward is faith. Just having faith that there is a purpose at the end of this, that not only all of the kids are going to be back, because there are families that deserve to have their kids back, and there are families that have lost their kids for good reasons, and they need to go through the counseling and therapy to be able to be reunified. But like, we need to do something now before it gets catastrophic. And we're already at that catastrophic stage. And so it's like, I just kind of want to see everybody come together. Like, I don't even care what it's called. At the end of the day, I just want to see social workers communicating with law enforcement, communicating with the military, communicating with the forensic investigators, because I am tired of seeing people silenced for their ability to like find the courage within to speak for themselves or somebody else.
Yeah, and like one thing you brought up earlier was like, if somebody's bringing up allegations of abuse in a civil restraining order case or a custody or divorce case, like that should be treated as a criminal complaint, and the DA or state's attorney should then file charges on the person, because like so many times like the abuse is getting brought up in like these civil cases, and these are criminal acts we're talking about. So like there should be requirements that anytime abuse is brought up in any court proceeding, that the state's attorney or district attorney must, launch an investigation and file criminal charges if necessary.
Well, not only
Because
that, here's the other thing on top of that. They need to make sure that no other states have pending charges against the people that actually committed the abuse and are then lobbying it back to the actual innocent one. Like the VCIN system needs to be 100% operative and there needs to be check and balances. So, like in specific situations, if somebody did something, let's say in West Virginia, and they then go to another state and say the other person did it, are there charges in West Virginia pending against that person? If so, you need to be charged with false reporting. You need to be then held accountable for that because now you don't want to be held accountable for the crimes you committed. You're now false lobbying it the other way. And that's, the balance there. There needs
it
to be a
also
check
works
and
the
balance.
other way. Like,
Yeah.
I know a girl, she was charged with basically the same crime from two different states when she's innocent. And so it's like, how can you be charged with the same crime from the same event in two different cases, in two different states? This is why there needs to be a federal, uniform system where all of these things, like where, they can put somebody's information in and see what do they have convictions and pending cases and restraining orders and stuff from all the other states. And, I think also these family court orders need to be enforceable, just like the restraining orders are. If it says whatever it says, like it should be enforceable by the police. If it's not, who else is going to enforce it? The judges and the Supreme Court, they're part of the judicial branch. The judicial branch only has so much power. In order to make a task force, it's not like the Supreme Court can be like, okay, now there must be a task force. That's executive's job. So that's where we have to really push the Trump administration and, the Biden administration. I had sent a complaint to the FBI and I had sent it with priority mail with tracking and it was like a package with evidence and everything. It got returned back to sender. So it's like my stuff is getting returned to sender under the Biden administration. So let's see what the Trump administration does, because the fact that they're already going after fraud and stuff, to me, is a good sign. And the other day, somebody asked me oh, are things any better now that Trump's there? And I'm like, well, maybe a little bit, but things are changing very fast. And I'm working on what I have to work on to try to push it along. And I just think you have to have faith. And in the end, the truth will come out, even if it's 20 years later. Do you think that Diddy ever thought he would be in jail? No. For what he did 30 years ago? No. And so it's I think that is a powerful reminder that the truth always comes out. And so it's you have to just keep pushing, keep documenting, keep having faith, and working together with other people who are passionate too. And if everybody, even if you could get political support behind this idea of the task force, start reaching out to senators and congressmen and women and ask them to publicly support this idea and, write to Trump and tell him a letter. I've heard people saying they wrote and got a letter back. So there's lots of stuff that, we can do. And I know it's hard. And also, like I was saying before, it's important to try to take time for yourself too. Don't forget that you still have to do self-care, because it's so hard to put yourself first when you're fighting for your children. But I think it's essential to even if it's going for a walk or going for getting a coffee or something, just to take time to just make yourself feel normal. That will then give you the strength to keep doing it more and keep going, because it is in here, it's about being strong mentally.
I think a prayer group would also be kind of beneficial to some of the victims, coming together at least once a week on Zoom and kind of praying together over these issues. Because I think when you have that, belief in God and a higher power, they literally just, we talk the administration. I mean, they are very God driven. And so, if we brought everybody together and it was kind of like a support group too, that's another aspect, because you can kind of separate it from northeast to southeast to Midwest to, and you kind of have like an ambassador from each that like brings everybody together. And maybe by separating the United States into like 4 or 5 sections, you can then hub the same aspect of what do you think a task force needs to look like? What is your issues in Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Kansas, all over there versus New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island versus South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida. And then you kind of start to kind of build this project that in the end, you have all representatives, like maybe the 5 or 6 top ones, and you bring them to DC and you say, okay, well, these are all the stories. This is all we've lived, and this is what we're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like making like a group on like Facebook or um some people like to do them on Telegram and some of those apps. Like I think that that's good because then you can like invite others to join and let it get more traction. And I think like the prayers and the positive thoughts and everything like do help, and having other people praying for others, like even if we did it where like if you can't go on Zoom, you can call in, or you can request, if people are in a different time zone, they can put their request if it's done at a certain time, and we can read it to them and stuff. And even people are from all different religions, but like most of the religions all believe that there's a higher power, period. So like however people put that positive thoughts and like energy into the universe, like it's going to come back. So I definitely think that's, maybe you're on Facebook, right?
I'm on
Or no?
Facebook. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
maybe
am.
start like a group like prayer, custody and divorce, DV, child abuse, prayer group for
Yep.
USA, something like that. And then just invite everybody, and like I can invite people, and we can just try to
Yep.
get something going. And you know, the key is like with strength in numbers, like they say, like nothing gets done until people work together. We're only powerful together. It's like that
Yep.
picture where it's like all the fish like eating like a shark, like they're like 100 fish. Like you've seen it.
I've seen it. Yep.
So, but thank you so much for, your time and all of your, insight. I think that you've made some really excellent points and observations, and, some of the things that you're working on are really good. And, let's stay in touch, and I'd be happy to try to connect you with some other, people who are like strong advocates right now. And I know a few like in some other states and stuff too. So I think if we get like some good people in each state, it will really give us a good like network.
I agree. And I totally appreciate you having me come on here too, and for your courage to actually speak out in the fight for your daughters, because, it's a tough thing, and the fact that you have the courage to continually do this is extremely powerful. So you should be very proud of yourself. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Yes, ma'am. Have a good night.
Okay. You too. Thank you so much.
Bye.